Okay, thank you, everyone, and sorry for the technical difficulties we seem to be having here. But as I said, this will be taped, and for those of you who got knocked off, you can get back online and go to the areas that you didn't see. So welcome again to our block party. We have a good webinar here for you today with 4 speakers, myself, Chris Chimura, Greg Chimura, our Chief Quality Officer, David Thonings, our Data Scientist, and Dave Toronto, the Director of Product Management. I'm located in Richmond, and the other 3 speakers are in our Cleveland, Ohio office. So just some real quick things in terms of who is Chimura. So we provide labor market data analysis, and what we really like to do is give you information that will help either your community or your region or your firm thrive. We were founded back in 1998, currently offices in Richmond and Cleveland. We're about 40 or so economists, data scientists, statisticians, and business professionals, and we really all have a passion about helping you grow your community or your career or your firm's expansion. We're driven by your satisfaction and success. On the consulting side of the business, we often go beyond the statement of work to provide more value to you to make sure that you have the kind of information you need to make good decisions. On the JobsEQ side, we have a long roadmap of items that we're adding based on what you tell us that you'd like to see to be more efficient or to be able to provide more information to your clients. And we'll hear more about how we've updated JobsEQ from Dave Toronto in just a little bit. And finally, at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, it's really excellence. That's our first priority, both in customer service and in data quality. So with that, a few administrative things. Please ask questions. There's a chat on the right-hand side, and we'll get to those questions at the end of this webinar. Also, the slides will be available later today, as well as the video, so that you can go back in and re-listen to parts if you'd like to. So beginning then with an overview of the economy. So I'll talk again about the national economy. The recession started in February. We'll show you data on that. GDP, employment, how they've been faring over this COVID recession and the expansion that we've seen over the last few months. And then we'll hear from Dave on JobsEQ product updates. He'll be followed by David, who will talk about states, ZICTAs, and blocks. And then Greg will end with talking about data and block regions. So the national overview then, all countries around the globe define GDP as, or define a recession as 2 declines in GDP, 2 consecutive declines. But here in the US, we've got this National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER, that defines recession dates. They've got a group of about 4 academics within the NBER that look at the monthly data to decide when a recession has started and ended. So some of the indicators they look at are shown here. Here's employment. You can see that when we went into the recession, we lost all of the jobs that were created over the prior expansion. We've seen about 50% of those jobs come back. The last 2 months, December and January, have been kind of flat with the rise in the infections from the virus. That's caused more people to pull back and not spend as much. Here we're looking at spending by consumers on goods and services, and they make up about 70% of GDP. So this is an extremely important piece of the economy. And you see when we went into the COVID recession, it dropped off significantly. And now we've seen them coming back to less than 5% decline year over year, much faster than most economists had expected. Income grew rapidly when we went into the recession, and that's because the federal government, because of the stimulus, the money provided to households, as well as the increase in unemployment insurance for people who were laid off. And then finally, at the bottom, industrial production is another indicator they look at. So what is output of manufacturing, utilities, and mining? And you can see the huge drop off again when we started into the pandemic, and we're climbing our way out of that at a fairly good pace. So GDP overall is now what you're looking at. The Great Recession is shown around 2008 through 2009. And you can compare that to the current recession, where we had about a 30% annualized decline in one quarter, but then the next quarter, you see the rebound of about 30%. The latest data that came out, fourth quarter of 2020, was up 4%. We expect the first quarter of this year to be sluggish with the increase in the virus. But then after that, especially the second half of the year, strong growth as we get the vaccine in place and herd immunity, and people start to feel like they can go out and spend. So even though economists all differ on their forecasts, what we all agree about is that this recession will be sharp and short and not sustained in terms of real GDP. And clearly we've already seen that in the areas where I've highlighted it in orange. So the economic recovery is dependent on a vaccine and herd immunity. And at the beginning of this recession, we were talking about needing to see a vaccine. And what's remarkable, I think, and some of you have been in other webinars of ours, is it usually takes 5 to 10 years to get a vaccine. We had one within 1 year. And then once you have the vaccine that's been approved, the manufacturer will typically start to manufacture the doses. Well, here in this case, Health and Human Services and the Department of Defense made agreements with Moderna and other firms to start to manufacture the vaccine, even though it was not approved yet, with the hope that it would be approved and then the vaccine could get out into the public faster. So herd immunity is going to be what brings us back to more normal times. And we'll give you our estimate on herd immunity in just a few minutes. But before we do that, let's look at some scenarios in terms of how fast employment will come back in this economy. Now, GDP fell tremendously and rebounded very quickly, not the case with employment. So on this graph, you're looking at employment indexed to the pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, we index it to 100, so that the way to read this is that for employment overall, we're looking at about a 12% decline by the second quarter. And this is actual data through the fourth quarter of 2020. You can see that we're only off by about 6% in terms of jobs. On the next slide, you're going to see that varies greatly by industry. So we've got 3 forecasts now. And as we've gone on, these forecasts have gotten closer together because, of course, the variance in the error expected changes are not as great as it was when we were looking at this 4 quarters ago. But in the most likely scenario, we look at the vaccine widely distributed in the second quarter of this year, and you would expect to see employment at pre-COVID levels 2 to 3 quarters later. The fast is seeming pretty unlikely at this point that the vaccine is widely distributed in the first quarter. It doesn't appear that will happen, but if it did, we'd see employment at pre-COVID levels in the second quarter of 2021. And then slow would be the vaccine widely distributed. Heightened infections, or maybe we should say that the variants caused some of the vaccines not to be as effective as they could be. And in that case, we wouldn't see employment to pre-COVID levels until the first or second quarter of 2023. So this looks like a real mess here, but this is employment by major sector. And we're reading it the same way, the index here, and then you can see the employment dropping off by different industries. And we're looking at this at the 2-digit level. So that's, we economists look at things at a major level. But when we did the analysis, we looked at industries at a more detailed level, such as the auto industry. Auto manufacturing is going to rebound differently than food manufacturing, et cetera. But in any case, so here we're looking at the high level 2-digit levels. Red is accommodation and food services, and green, arts and entertainment. These 2 industries have been impacted the most. So if you're in a region that has a lot of that type of industry, your depth of the recession will be greater and the rebound will be slower. So notice this red, accommodation and food services, it gets back to 95%. So here, end of this year, they're still 5% below what the COVID levels were, pre-COVID levels were. And then as we go through fourth quarter of 2022, they're still not back up to pre-COVID levels in our forecast. Arts and entertainment does a little better than that, getting up to the pre-COVID levels, and then even starting to show some growth after that. Now I'm going to peel away some of those industries so we can get an idea of how some of the other ones are growing that are not declining as much. In green, mining, quarrying, gas, oil and gas is shown here. So you can see how that is rebounding. In red, we're looking at administrative and support. So this is supporting companies that may be landscaping or other services that support headquarters. And sorry, let me go back up one more time. This green one is interesting. This is agriculture. So notice agriculture employment dropped off quickly, but not that great. And by the next quarter, the second quarter of 2020, it was above 100. That is above pre-COVID employment levels. And it continues at that over the entire period here. On this next slide now, we're looking at retail trade, again, dropping off about 13% of its employment. And here, notice that over this time period, it doesn't get back to pre-COVID level. And in fact, the forecast for retail jobs is to decline slightly over time because of e-commerce and other things that are causing a shift of those jobs to other sectors. This dark black line is the information industry, computer, IT, high tech. And notice again, the dip is not as great and it comes back fairly well. And another one I wanted to highlight here is the purple, which is health and healthcare and social assistance. And notice that when we get to the pre-pandemic employment levels, it continues to grow at the fastest rate. So healthcare industry doing well, especially post-pandemic. So now, when do we get to herd immunity? And as an economist, I never thought that I'd be studying on medical information as much as we are and the health of the country. But Alex Doherty, an economist that works with us, did a great job of putting together this herd immunity model. And if you would like all the detail on how it's put together, you can click on this blog. But we have three scenarios here. When we get to herd immunity, most people have defined it as 80% or more are immune from the vaccine, are immune from the virus, either because they have the vaccine or they had the virus. In this most likely case, you see us getting to herd immunity around November of this year. So that's the point when we would expect that people are going to start to be able to go out and spend like they did in the past and feel good about being in the economy. The optimistic scenario gets us there by September of this year, and the pessimistic scenario not until 2022. And again, you can see all of our assumptions on that if you go to the blog there. But here are just a couple of quick high-level assumptions as of February 8th, and we're updating these every week, so you could come back and see how the nation is doing. And we're also finishing up having this ready so that you can see every state and how they're performing. For example, Alaska and West Virginia are number 1 and 2 in terms of the number that have had their the percentage that have had their vaccination. So as of February 8th, 32 million Americans received their first dose. About 9 million had the second dose, and that's with the CDC data. Over the past week, on average, we were administering 1.4 million doses per day. President Biden wants us to get to 1.5 million soon. And of course, that would have an impact. The optimistic scenario is closer to what the Biden administration is pushing toward. One thing that people have asked us a lot about is the stay-at-home policies. Will it last? And when you hear things in the media, you would think that the vast majority of workers are working from home. And the BLS in July added a question to its household survey. And back in July, 26% of people said that they teleworked in the past 4 weeks due to the pandemic. That dropped to 21.8% in November. It inched up a little as the viruses start to spread a bit more. And then it's come back down in January to 23.3%. Also, people who said they were unable to work because their employer closed or lost business due to the pandemic, 31.3 million back in July. Again, this is a special question BLS is asking. That came down to 14.8 in November, jumped back up to almost 24% in December with the increase in the viruses, and down to 15.9 January, which is the latest data. So I always like to show this. Ken Budd of The Atlantic wrote this great article in July, and it's entitled "COVID-19 Won't Chase Us Forever." I'd suggest that you Google it. It's very encouraging, and I'd just like to bring it in here because it's been so long that we've been staying at home and working from home, and some of us it has affected us greater than others. So it's good to have some optimism. So Ken Budd, in his research, found that within 3 years after 9/11, the airline industry set a record high for passengers. The 1918 pandemic was followed by the Roaring '20s. And in 1919, after the flu pandemic killed 675,000 Americans, Major League Baseball attendance was at record levels. We rebuild after disasters, and here are a few examples. And we've all heard about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's something called post-traumatic growth. And there's research on this if you want to Google it. And that is that people thrive after enduring negative life change events. So I think in the midst of all this stay at home and difficulty that we're going through now, that we're going to see some good things happening on the other side of this year as we see herd immunity. Just one more thing before I turn this over to Dave. And so we have job postings within our JobsEQ product for those of you who use it. And job postings are a leading indicator of employment growth. So we spider all these thousands of sites, we deduplicate it, and then we took our history and we used it to forecast what would job postings look like if we did not go into this COVID era. And then we looked at actual job postings during COVID and noticed that, of course, when we first started into the pandemic, job postings fell off tremendously. That's because no one was hiring anyone, or there weren't very many people hiring anyone because they didn't know how long this would last, how bad it would get. And then as we start to see the illnesses going down, we started to see job postings going up and getting closer to what we would expect them to be. But then as the virus started to spread again, we saw the job postings going down. And then most recently, you can see relative to where we would expect them to be, there's quite a distance there. So again, this is a blog, a model that was created by James Stintcomb, one of our economists up in Cleveland. And he updates it on a weekly basis or so. And we also have it by state. So here's the US, and it's the same information. So we're looking at where is a particular state's job postings relative to what it should be. And only Wisconsin is above where you would expect it to be. New York City, for example, is 27% below what you would expect during a non-COVID time. So we can click on any of our states. Here I clicked on New York, and you can see, again, here's the actual during COVID job postings. Here's what we would have expected it to be. And then most recently, again, you can see in New York City with the, they had been making progress. With the increase in the virus spreading, we can see the number being a bigger spread, a larger spread from what we would expect. So one last item here. If you're one of our clients, you probably get our weekly economic update. It's a 4-page report that we send out over the weekend that talks about the numbers that came out last week. What do they mean? What numbers are expected to come out next week? And then has the Fed given any speeches that are relevant to what we would expect to happen in terms of policy and interest rates? And then on the last page, we show some financial data as well as a forecast for interest rates. So if any of you are interested, please put that in the chat, and Avery will be glad to set you up to receive that on a weekly basis at no charge. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Dave, who will talk to us. He's our Director of Product Management, to talk to us about JobsEQ updates.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Toronto, and I'm the Director of Product Management here at Shimura. In my role, I serve as the Product Manager for JobsEQ. You might ask, what does that mean? Simply put, it means that I help ensure that our digital products are aligned to best serve the needs of our clients. I like to use the phrase that we develop our digital products through the eyes of our clients. That's how important it is to me in terms of aligning our product with the needs of our clients. As Chris mentioned, I'll be talking about the recent JobsEQ update and our new family of JobsEQ products. Today, we'll not only cover what has changed in JobsEQ, but more importantly, we'll discuss why JobsEQ has changed. So why has JobsEQ changed? Over the years, our clients have provided us a significant amount of feedback regarding JobsEQ. This feedback helps us understand what we're doing well, and it also helps us understand what we aren't doing well. While clients have expressed confidence in our data as they view us as a trusted partner, over the years, they've also expressed that JobsEQ can be viewed sometimes as being intimidating, not intuitive, or perhaps not tailored to meet their individual needs. So the reason for the JobsEQ change was to address this very feedback. With that background, let's cover what has changed. And I'm going to screen share our new JobsEQ product, so bear with me. Okay. Chris or David or Greg, can you confirm you can see my screen, please?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Before I start the demo, let me start by saying that everything you love about JobsEQ is staying. Our analytics, our data, the customizations that you've made, none of that has changed or is going away. However, what has changed is that we've created a family of JobsEQ products which provide both a beautiful and more inviting layout, as well as a tailored and more intuitive experience. Here on my screen, you can see JobsEQ, which provides access to the tailored family of JobsEQ products, including JobsEQ for Education, JobsEQ for Workforce, and JobsEQ for Economic Development. As I scroll down, you'll also see that we've incorporated all of our Chmura content into JobsEQ. Everything from our blogs to our case studies, videos, webinars, podcasts, all of this information is now available right at your fingertips. I mentioned that JobsEQ provides a more intuitive experience. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look. If I jump into any of these three versions of JobsEQ, let's start with JobsEQ for Education, you'll see these tiles here. We refer to these as workflows. What are workflows? Well, you may have heard the term use case in the past, right? Effectively, the different things that our users of JobsEQ are trying to accomplish, we've created workflows to align with those use cases. In essence, what we're trying to do is provide you a quick and efficient way of accessing the analytics that best support the use case that you're trying to satisfy through JobsEQ. So here you can see for the education version of JobsEQ, we've got use cases created for demand, researching credentials and skills, describing the benefit an institution may have on its local economy, so on and so forth. We follow that same pattern for the other versions of JobsEQ. So if I jump into Workforce, you'll see again tiles here, but these use cases are specific to the workforce. So effectively, you're going to see demand, you're going to see a use case or workflow centered around defining vulnerable workers in your market, right? Understanding wages for jobs in your region, so on and so forth. And of course, for good measure, looking at economic development, you'll see again another set of customized use cases. So we'll walk through a couple of these workflows just to see effectively what we mean by making it a little bit more intuitive and a little bit better of an experience for our users. To start, let's jump into education. I mentioned there's a few workflows here. We're going to focus on the one here that talks about credentials and skills, effectively trying to understand credentials and skills that a student may need. And if I go into that, you'll see that the workflow is organized by tabs. So you can click through these tabs in any order. It's not prescriptive in any way in terms of forcing you to go through the analytics in a certain way, but it does organize sort of logically how we feel the analytics should be used to satisfy this credentials and skills use case. So the first analytic that I would jump into is the awards analytic. You may be familiar with this, and I'm going to go ahead and run that. I'll go ahead and run it for by school, and I'll just pick a school here local to the Cleveland area. And very quickly, I can see the different programs that are available for that particular school. If I expand accounting program, I can see the occupations. So with just a few clicks, I can see which occupations are crosswalked to the accounting program. If I want to get a little bit more information regarding the accounting program, I can go back to the workflow. And here you can see our next analytic in line is our RTI add-on. If I go into RTI, I can run that, again, by that same accounting program. And which is the click of a button, and based on the job postings data that we've captured, you can see that Ernst & Young is the top employer, at least by job postings, for the accounting degree. I might want to get additional information, so I can go back to my workflow. Again, you can see I ran RTI and awards to kind of help understand both the occupations and the employers associated with my accounting degree. But perhaps I want to get a little bit more detail. Maybe I want to understand credentials associated with the accounts and auditors occupation that we saw earlier. So if I go into occupation characteristics, I can run that now for my occupation. And very quickly, I can see details related to the educational attainment. So here, about 25%, just under 25% have master's degree, just over 50% have a 4-year degree. So I start to paint now a picture of, for my accounting program, right? What are the occupations associated with it? Who are the employers? What's the educational characteristics for that particular program, or I should say occupation? I can actually go back to the workflow and run even more analysis. Here you can see resume forensics is another one of our upsells. And if you go into resume forensics, I can run that. And this is, again, based on our resume data. I can query this both by occupation. So if I did that very quickly and pull up the accountant's occupation again, and if I actually query that also by employer, which we saw Ernst & Young was a top employer in the area, I glean insight in terms of things like job titles, right? So what are the job titles for those individuals working in that occupation for Ernst & Young? I can understand certifications, right? So CPA, no surprise there. And I can also get insight in terms of hard and soft skills. So all within that one workflow, and again, easily organized. You've got the analytics, again, organized by tab that you can run through that help support that credentials and skills use case. If I go back to the JobsEQ homepage, just for good measure, we'll run through one more workflow. This time, let's take a look at economic development. If I go into economic development, perhaps I want to define the jobs that are in demand in my region. You'll see that the analytics are organized in the same way that you just saw with education, right? There's the various tabs. And rather than presenting to you all the analytics that are available in JobsEQ, we're just presenting those that best support this particular use case. I may run industry snapshot in this case. I'm running it for the Cleveland MSA across all industries. If I want to look at things from a employment growth perspective, I can sort the table, and you can see healthcare and social assistance is forecasted for the greatest growth in Cleveland over the next year. Perhaps I want to understand what occupations fall under that industry, so I can go back to my workflow and I can run industry occupation mix, right? Because again, it's brought here to be able to support this demand use case. If I do that, I can run the analytic for that healthcare industry. I can once again sort the data based on employment growth. And I can see personal care aides is the top occupation under the healthcare industry forecasted growth. And maybe I want to get some information regarding that particular occupation. Perhaps I want to understand which employers are hiring based on job postings. I can go back to the workflow, click on the next tab, and here you see again the RTI product that's available. I can jump into that and search that for personal care aides. And just like that, I'm able to identify the top employers. And then lastly, if I go back to the workflow, I might want to understand skill gaps as it relates to that particular occupation. So I can go back and run skill gaps. I can again filter that by the personal care aide's occupation. Let me do that. And then let's say I want to look at it from a certification perspective. By running that, I can very quickly see that there's a gap in first aid certification for that particular occupation. So again, the analytics, if you're familiar with the ones that I've shared here, from awards to RTI to OC characteristics, skill gaps, industry snapshot, nothing has changed. They run exactly the same way that you're used to. They provide the same data that you're used to. All we've tried to do is bring the analytics together, organize them in such a way so they align with your use cases, and that's what these workflows are intended to do. And again, we've provided the workflows specific to each of the various products, education, workforce, economic development, so as to provide that tailored experience for you. That all said, we totally understand, good software development, right? You always want to ensure that you're not too disruptive to your users' experience. So we fully can understand and appreciate there are some users who may not like or want, or for whatever reason, engage with the new workflows that we've created. So along those lines, you'll see this All Tools button here. This should look familiar to you, right? This is effectively our classic JobsEQ view. So this will always be available to you. You can simply click into any of these packages, click into All Tools, and see your traditional JobsEQ layout. Along the same lines, you can go into your user profile and you can set right here, set a radio buttons. If you just set this to All Tools and save your profile, the next time that you log in, you would actually then be dropped into the All Tools page. So effectively, you would be able to get back to your traditional JobsEQ view if you wanted to. But we're hopeful that even though that's available to some users if they want it, we're really hopeful that folks will see the value in the things that we've created with these tailored versions of JobsEQ and the workflows that are available within each. So that effectively concludes my presentation. I would love to hear, or we would love to hear your feedback. So I know that in the webinar here, we've got a poll, and one of the questions that we've asked are your thoughts on the changes for JobsEQ. If you've had the opportunity to sort of see what we've done, we'd love to hear your feedback, both good and bad. Again, as I mentioned earlier, my motto is to develop the product through the eyes of our clients. So we would love to hear your feedback and encourage you to not only respond to the poll, but to provide your feedback to us through either the chat or your account manager.
Okay, Dave, I have actually just put up the poll, so let's give people a minute to answer, and then I'll give you the results, and then we could move forward with the rest of the webinar. You bet, you bet. And I'll start to kind of transition things a little bit here for us. Obviously, I know we encourage you to ask questions, obviously, in the chat, and I think the way we're going to address those at the end of the webinar, we'll go ahead and run through those questions in order. But as I continue the conversation here for us, I know you guys are going to have questions regarding our block level data and how that can make your research more precise. To kick off the block level data part of the webinar, I'd like to introduce David Thonings. David has been a data scientist with Chmura for 8 years, and he's going to talk about how we aggregate millions of data points into one picture. Okay. David? Oh, actually, David and Dave, before you start, let me give you the results of the poll. Sure. Of those who have responded so far, 86% say they like the new JobsEQ design update, 9% are indifferent, and 4% dislike. So I will end the poll, and then perhaps Dave, you could have more to say afterward about that. But David, thanks. We look forward to your presentation.
Great.
Okay. Good. Thanks, Dave and Chris. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. My name is David Thonings, and I've been a data scientist at Chmura Economics and Analytics since 2013. In my time with Chimera. I've seen a lot of fun and wonderful analytics and data sets being introduced. And this time, I'm excited to see the block data get introduced. Block data, yeah, boom, chicka, boom. Right, so the reason why this is so exciting is you'll see here in a little bit on what I mean, what we can do with block data. So I have a sister who lives in Chicago, and this is just a little background. And in one of my trips to Chicago, we went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And there, you see a lot of wonderful art pieces. And one of those pieces I saw was a Sunday on Le Grand Jatte. And here we go. And it looks pretty famous. Everyone probably has seen this here or there. The official name is A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Le Grand Jatte. It was created by the French post-impressionist Georges Seurat. He introduced at the time something that we now call pointillism, but he called back then divisionism. What was divisionism? It was a new style of painting in which he took his composition and he separated it into entities. So, for example, in this picture, he took something like, well, every object in this, and he divided it up into separate entities. So, for example, he took the child, and then he took the child and he divided that into smaller parts and smaller parts and smaller parts until he got down to the very essence of the picture, which would have been simple dots. His idea behind this was that if he created a whole entire composition out of the tiny dots together of different colors and different shapes and sizes, the eye would eventually be able to blend together everything, called optical blending, to create a more realistic view. This painting, all in all, is 7 by 11 feet. That's pretty big. And it took him over 2 years to create this painting. It's been estimated that there are about 220,000 dots. That's a lot of dots. So now what we can do is we can look at how he took all these small pieces, the essence, the essential pieces of a painting of light, and we can apply that to our regions. So we have at a very high level our nation. If we start zooming in, our nation is comprised of states, and then each state has a bunch of counties, and each county has some cities, and they also have zictas. Zictas now are the zip code tabulation areas that were brought into effect starting with the Census 2000 data. And what they are their generalized aerial representation of U.S. Postal Service zip codes. And there are about 32,000 zictas in the U.S. We can take zictas, though, and we can break those down into individual blocks. The blocks, they are the smallest geographical area that the Bureau of Census collects, the decennial census data. What they are they're areas of a city that are formed by streets, roads, railroads, streams, bodies of water, other kind of legal boundaries. And there's about 11 million blocks that we use today. So what we'll do is we'll take the data that we have for each block, and we're able to aggregate them up, just like Seurat did using his dots of paint to build up his painting. And we're going to take the blocks, and we're going to take the data, and we're going to make a zicta. Well, we can comprise up the zicta level. Then we can go up to the county level. Then we can go up to the state level, and then back to the nation. So this is really exciting because now we can take all this granular data that we got from the block level, and we can build both our old regions that we were able to always have, and then we also are able to build up more complex boundaries and regions that are only limited by our own imagination. So that's a brief overview on what the block level data is and how we're going to use it. To get into more aspects of this block data, I'm pleased to introduce our Chief Quality Engineer, Greg Chimera.
Thanks, David. All right, so I'll be continuing with the slideshow and also showing my screen. So let's do that right now. Okay, there's the JobsEQ welcome screen. First, I have a few slides, though, to get into. Let me just click the right application and do that. All right, we'll switch this. All right, so let's talk a bit more data. So the block and place data, this is great, but you may ask yourself, what's the big deal? Also, what took so long? So let's talk about this a little bit. So Dave was giving us some numbers. Let me reiterate those here. So we have about 3,100 counties in the US. So when we started JobsEQ, which is getting close to 20 years ago, we basically began that and worked at the county level. When we expanded to zip codes, the zip code tabulation areas, it was about a 10-fold increase in volume. All right, so that's not too bad, but it was significant. When we go to places, actually the places, so this is the cities, the villages, the towns, and also those census designated places that the Census Bureau all calls under the technical name places. There's about 29,000 of those. So going from zip code to place, it's not really a volume increase so much. But the issue is that depending on the data set, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next couple of slides, some of the data for places needs to be built up from those blocks. And so it's really reliant on having all the block data there. And so as David had mentioned, we have 11 million census blocks. So that's a huge increase in volume from these other regional entities, right? And not only, it's not just 11 million data points too, because for example, when you're talking about employment, let's say industry employment, there's over 1,000 NAICS codes. For occupation employment, there's over 800 occupation codes. So about 2,000 potential data points there. Also in JobsEQ, we have historical data going back 20 years. And every year it has 4 quarters, so that's about 80 more data points for all of those industries and occupations potentially. Not only are there employment, there's wages, then there's other data for demographics and so forth. So for any kind of single region, it could easily be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of data points. So all those data points add up, and part of the reason it took a while for us to build this, and we've been planning on building this for a while, is just the engineering of moving all these data around and having them in a format on the application side that makes it easy to query and to have it ready in a reasonable amount of time. Okay, so with some of the data sets, they're fairly straightforward. So for example, we have in JobsEQ awards data, completions data for post-secondary schools. And that comes from the National Center for Education Statistics. And that we could bring in pretty straightforwardly because we have an address of the university, so we know right where those data belong. We could put it very precisely by geography. With the Census Bureau demographics, so we use that in JobsEQ. In the demographic profile, we show many data points describing the population, characteristics of the population, education levels, labor force data, and so forth. And for those data from the Census Bureau, some are available down to the block level or some very granular levels like the block group or census tract. And so that's also very consistent data from this block to the nation. It's all the same data set, so we could build it up from the ground up. So those two data sets are somewhat straightforward as far as constructing the data and using it in JobsEQ. When it comes to the employment, on the other hand, it's really different. So here are some of the main sources we have. At the county, we rely a lot on the quarterly census of employment and wages, plus some other things as well. But quarterly census of the employment and wages, the QCEW, that's the primary piece there, at least the biggest piece. At the zip code level, we have the zip code business patterns plus some other things that we bring in there. And then at the block level, we have what's called the Lowe's data set, which you can see the name there, the longitudinal employer household dynamics, origin, destination, employment statistics, which I wrote out for a reason. And all of these data sets, for one thing, they're not necessarily consistent with each other. And the other thing is that the QCEW at the top, the county level, that's the gold standard. That's the most robust, most thorough data. And so in this case, we don't build up from the bottom up. We start really from the top down, and we have to honor all of these different data sets in combining them. So methodologically, we have to work very carefully in doing this. And so it took a while to do that. Actually, though, we've been working with these data, these block level data, and doing this method for over 8 years now. So we've used these data on the consulting side of the house in various projects for a number of years. So for example, when we do site selection work, working with the site selector, analyzing the labor availability for a moving company, we've been using block data for many years now. We just haven't had it into JobsEQ, and part of the process there was preparing JobsEQ and the engineering and the architecture so we could have it in there and have it in a way that could be queried more efficiently. So I want to show some example block use cases. A few slides here, then we'll jump into JobsEQ, and I'll show you some things within JobsEQ itself. So one reason why you might want to create block regions. So this is within JobsEQ, create your own custom block region to query data for. One reason you might want to do that is if you're working within a city, for example, and want to create the council districts or the city wards, whatever they might be called locally. So this is something, or some kind of neighborhood, the central business district, something like that. What you could do is go into our region build tool, which I'll show you in a few minutes, and you could select these blocks and create your own region. You could save it and use it. So that's one example of why you might want to use these custom block data. Another reason is you might want to do a drive time. So you want to model your labor shed around a certain area. So this might be for a company looking to analyze the labor force around their location or their potential location. And like I said, we've been doing this in our site selection work, and we like to use the block data because it's going to give us the most accurate results. And so here's an example of that. In this case, I created a drive time from downtown Memphis. And Memphis, there you see on the right-hand side, the white and blue going through the middle, that's the Mississippi River there. And in this case, Memphis, you have a large population area, pretty concentrated in the middle. And as you move out, the population density really decreases, and it's a lot more sparse on the outside. So in this case, you're going to see an effect that's a little bit different than we're going to see in the next slide. So in this case, when we create this region at the block level, a 45-minute drive time, and we analyze the labor shed, we find out there's a labor force of about 641,000 people. Now we could also do this at the zip code level, which means we create the drive time and include any zip code that's even partially inside that drive time. All right, so instead of at block level, it's zip code level. When we do it that way, it's going to be a little bit larger, so it's a little less accurate. So about 688,000 people it's going to estimate. And that's not really too bad. It's just within 7%. So for a rough estimate of the labor shed, really, it's really not too bad at all in this particular case. We could also analyze this at the county level, meaning we could run our drive time and then include any county which is even partially within that drive time. If we do that, it's going to be a little rougher. It's going to estimate 737,000, so about plus 15%. It's still not an outrageously bad estimate of the labor force within that drive time. It's just a little looser though. All right. But in this case, we have a large population, density population in the middle, and it's sparser on the outside. What if we did the same kind of thing with the reverse? So in this case, now I'm looking at Cactus Forest, Arizona. This is a very small place. About 500 people live there. and it's about halfway between Phoenix and Tucson. And the edges of the 45-minute drive time are just reaching into both of those more densely populated areas. So in this case, if we run the analysis at the block level, so just the exact blocks that correspond with that drive time, we have a labor force estimated at 175,000 people. If now we try to do this at the zip code level and include any zip code that intersects with that, it's going to be a lot bigger. It's going to be 317,000, so an error of about 80%. So that's definitely going to overestimate the labor force if we use that zip code level here. If we try the county-based, it's going to be ridiculous, 2.7 million. In Arizona, you have some really huge counties. And so it's going to be including any county that it even touches, that 45-minute drive time. So really that's not at all the way you'd want to estimate a 45-minute drive time to be accurate in this case. All right, so there's different value there for when you want to use that block-based region. And especially in a case like this where you're in a starting off in a more sparsely populated area, and the edges are kind of in those more populated zones, then you really want to be as accurate as possible there. Okay, let me jump now into JobsEQ and show you some of these things here in the system.
So, Greg, while you're jumping into JobsEQ, a couple questions have come in. I think maybe you could answer them now before you do that. Frank says, what are you using for the travel network / travel times by link?
Oh, yes. So for the travel times, that's coming from data from Esri. And so when you are in JobsEQ, let me go there right now, and you're creating a custom region, you'll have a page like this. And so right here, the drive time, you could click on this and you could specify here the time of day. So this is data coming from Esri, and typically we'll use just the average drive time, but you can also specify the time of day for traffic patterns.
And then one other question, Robin is asking, I have been using census tracts to determine poverty levels in the city. Can this be done using block groups?
Yes, so I'll have to check. So within the demographic profile, let me go there. So we have a lot of data here. Some of it is available at the block level, the population, race, ethnicity. Some of these other ones, when we get down here, for example, the labor force, educational attainment, some of these are available either at the census block group or the census tract level. And so we're using those data here, but within JobsEQ, you could create it at any kind of level of detail you want. And what we could do is we could impute lower levels based on those patterns at the group or the tract level.
Okay, thanks, Greg. There's one more question, but I'll let you finish your demo before we get to it.
Okay, no problem. So I'd like to just show you a few things with the region build so you can get a better flavor of how that works. So here's the new interface. First, I have a list of all the different regions I've created in the past. And you notice here that we designate what the resolution is. So this is a nice way so you can say, okay, I made this region at the county level, or this one at the zip code level, or these are at the block level. All right. And then also when you're in tools, you'll have these little globes and different colored globes next to the name. So a nice convenient way for you to reference what you created if you don't remember. To create a new region, I'm going to click that link. And we have this map here. So I'm going to be working here. I'll start in the Cleveland area. And we could create a region at the county, ZICTA, or block level. And before you save it, just choose what resolution you want, and that will save it appropriately. Let me show you, for example, a drive time. So if we do a drive time, let's say 45 minutes, and let me do it from downtown Cleveland. So I'm just going to click on the map. You can put in an address if you want, but I'm just going to click over here on the map. It will use the average drive time in this case, and it will create a picture of what that looks like. All right. And now I could choose to save this at various levels. So I could give this a name, call this sample drive time. And if I click save now, it's going to save this as the group of counties that intersect, oops, with this drive time. All right, so let me just save it right now and I'll show you that. It saves it. And then it's going to give me a little preview, which I want to show you. So right over here, it's already saved. And I click on this little preview button, and this will show me the exact region. So in this case, it saved it as a collection of counties. All right, so any county that drive time touched, it saves it for me. And so now I could run some queries based on that group. But if I want to be more precise, I could run this at the block level. And that will give me something that really maps super closely to the exact drive time. So that's something you want to do if you want to be more precise. Now you can also do it at the zip code level for that in-between mode. And that's what that would look like. So any intersection there with the zip code, it will include the whole zip code. All right. Now the thing I should mention here, if you want to save the block level, we're talking about so much data that we cannot have this available instantly. If you run a save a region in JobsEQ at the county or the zip code level, within seconds, it's computed, it's available. You could run any kind of analysis for the demographics, what if analysis, whatever you want, and you could run that instantly. For the block, it's just so much data that we have to compile these data for you. So if you want to save this at the block level, you will click save, and it will take a few minutes to compile. So I've been testing this, and it takes, if it's a small region, it might take 3 minutes. If it's a bigger region like this, it might take 15 minutes. If it's not, it might take longer though if we have a number of things, a number of requests in our queue. So it might take longer than that, but it will take at least that long for us to compile the data for it to be ready. So if you need data in 1 minute and you can't wait for that to be ready, then you can run it at the zip code level. And that's a fair way to run it. And like you saw in the Memphis example, it'll give you a pretty close estimate. The other thing you can do sometimes to work around, so let me just discard this one. Let me pull up the Memphis example to show you something. If you don't want to use the block data, here's my zip code for Memphis. What we do with the drive time and at the zip code level is we're going to include any zip code that this is touching. And if you look at this map over here, see this orange here, like right over here. Let me zoom in over here so you can see this a little bit better. Notice that this zip code right over here, and the name's going to pop up in just a second. So 38069, it's getting included there. And just because our drive time just barely works into there. So you could also use this function here in JobsEQ where it's the select tool. I'm going to select this 38069 by clicking on it. And then I'm going to exclude it. So I'm going to come over here on the side. This is a new feature that we added just recently. I'm going to click that gear. Then I'm going to say exclude this region and save that. And so when this gets compiled, it will make sure not to include that zip code. So that's a way you could work if you want to work at the zip code level to exclude some of these zip codes that are just being partially touched. So that's a partial solution for you if you want to work at this level. For that example, like in Cactus Forest, that's going to be a little bit more difficult just because of the way it intersects so many different zip codes partially. In that case, it's really hard to use this method to really improve it, to get it closer to where the actual block level data would be. All right, but those are a few things that you could do. Let me just discard this. I also want to show you before we end here, within JobsEQ, let me go to the All Tools and the Industry Snapshot. So you could query now any place in JobsEQ. So for example, if we're going to use Phoenix, you'll see some different examples of Phoenix, the Phoenix MSA. You also have the City of Phoenix. And the City of Phoenix here, we have all the data. You could get down to any NAICS level you want. So we could, let's say, look at the 4-digit level. All right. You could also run demographics, other things of that nature. One thing to note, for some of the places that are more dependent on the block data. So if you, for example, here, the village of Brooklyn Heights, here's one where because it's not reliant on a single zip code or a collection of zip codes, but really has to be built up from the block level. That lowest level of data from the loads data set, it's only available at the 2 digits. So for some of these places, such as this one, we only have really that source 2-digit data available. So in JobsEQ, for the industry employment, at least we only go down to the 2-digit level. So that's one thing to be aware of. For other data though, for example, the demographic profile, for a place such as this village, we're gonna have all of the demographics, so that will be there. For the completions data from the NCS, we'll have all of that there as well. It's just on that industry employment side that it'll be cut back to the 2-digit level, just to make sure that the data quality are there, that we're not making we don't want to be making leaps of assumptions on the data in that case. Okay, so now we'll take a look at some questions. Chris, you have some more questions?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Greg. And I've enjoyed looking at your comments. I especially enjoyed Aaron's comment, who said, can I get a cup of whatever David Thonings is having? And having been at the Cleveland office and seeing David work, he's always full of energy. So it may be just his regular coffee, but I think he does have a special shop he goes to. So maybe he could answer that later. But thank you all for joining. We're at a little bit over the hour mark. We have another half an hour for those of you who can stay. For those of you who can't, thanks for all the good work that you're doing, whether it's workforce or economic development or education to support your regions. This is really a hard time, and we appreciate the work, and let us know what we can do to help. And we will continue to have these webinars as long as you find them useful. But with that, some questions, especially for Greg. Marcia is asking, once you have saved a region at the block level, then the wait time is no longer a problem. Is that correct?
Right, exactly. So yeah, we're still showing my screen here. So once you compile that region, then, so for example, when I did that cactus, what's it called? Cactus forest, right? And let me pull up that block level. So this one took maybe 10 or 15 minutes to compile. Once it's compiled, now it's available. So anything I run now, I could just run it instantly, very quickly, and it's all ready to go. So that's only the first time that you have to compile it. Well, actually, the first time you compile it, when we run a quarterly update, which happens every quarter, they'll need to be recompiled as well. But that first time is just a one-time thing.
Okay, thanks, Greg. We have a good question here from Frank. Loads has many geocoding errors. Some are the result of the Census Bureau adding error to avoid disclosure of individual businesses. Is there any opportunity for local agencies to provide corrections and then have those maintained over time?
Right, so that's a good question. So, and like I said, that's one of the reasons. So with the loads, with the way things are coded there, both by geography, right, and the fact that there's some noise introduction in those data as well, potentially. That's definitely a problem, and that's why, like I said, we work from the top down. We like to honor those higher level data to keep better integrity overall with those data. That's a really good question. I know with the noise side of it, they're going to be introducing that, and there's not a way that can be controlled. They're doing that for privacy purposes. For the corrections for the location side, that's a good question too. I think you'd need to talk with the census folks about that one. And I'm not sure how well they could work around that, because they're combining a number of different data sources to create that. And they have all, the origin destination work going on. But that's certainly a worthwhile question to ask them about.
Okay, thanks, Greg. I have one question and then a general question. Question for me. We have been trying to assess the number of parents, women and men, who are either furloughed, laid off, and then had to choose to stay at home with children because of remote learning in their schools, and those parents who have had to leave and not re-enter the workforce. Have you at Chimura heard of any reports, or have you yourself collected any data on this topic? I can think of some like Wall Street Journal articles, and the Conference Board, for example, recently did a survey, and they didn't get direct at this, but they did find that women were more apprehensive about going back to work with the pandemic situation. And in part, they theorized that it was because they were taking care of either elderly parents or kids at home. But we do have your name, and I'm going to ask Avery to get your email address for me, and I'll look around to see if I can find something more specific. The Federal Reserve banks are usually pretty good about hitting on some of these topics. So off the top of my head, I don't have anything specific to share with you, but I'll take a look around. And then general question, and maybe Greg, this will be for you. Does the JobsEQ tool at the MSA level allow for any breakdown by demographic groups?
So sure. So if we do an MSA level group in here, so for example, let me put in Detroit MSA. So we have all the demographic data here. And really, at the MSA level, you could run any analytic in JobsEQ. So here we have all these data aggregated, or some of these are reported directly at the MSA, depending on what source we're talking about. We could look at things like occupation characteristics. So something for this example, we could go into something very specific, let's say like registered nurses, and we have data for all the demographics broken down for this specific occupation. And we could do this for all the occupations. So really, even economic impact analyses at the Detroit level. So putting in a certain industry here and the event. So there's a lot of various analyses and data that you could run at the MSA level, if that answers the question.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Julie has responded to Frank's question that was asked. She said that the Census Bureau started the Household Pulse Survey in April that asks about employment, virus concerns, caring for others, etc. It may answer the unemployed question, parent questions. Thanks for that, Julie. But then she says it's only for larger metro areas. The census also in July added some special questions to their household survey that I mentioned earlier in this presentation, and we'll take a look and see if we could find that. I'm wondering if there are any more questions, Avery. I am not seeing any. If you can, in the chat, let us know or email us. And again, while we're waiting for her to respond, thank you all again for attending. We appreciate the hard work that you do, especially during these times when we're all struggling to help other people that we serve. Okay, I am not seeing any more questions. And so again, we will be posting this later. Those of you who have attended will get copies of the slides, and we look forward to your feedback on this webinar and others you may want us to do. Please let us know some topics, and we'll be glad to follow up. So be safe, wear your mask, and please go out and spend. Thanks again.